The affirmative case is literally just, at this point, your country should be a weird foreign welfare battery farm, and you get absolutely no say because every time we've consulted you, you've said no thanks and we've delivered it anyway, and you're a racist if you complain.
And you had various Labour MPs come in there and say how absolutely immoral it was on principle, how indeed, far from restricting ILR, they should be opening up new routes in order to take the fight to the right and things like this. And so what that means is that when Labour finally get round to this consultation, which they supposedly are doing soon, all of these Labour MPs are going to start kicking off about it majorly. That's the headache he has.
A lot of people in the country, God bless them, are still not fully aware of what a demographic vandal Boris Johnson was. And as such, there are some polls that suggest, particularly with Conservative voters, that they view a sort of Nigel Boris ticket as just complete gold dust and well worth pushing for, now that Reform are explicitly using the term Boriswave.
53% of the British public are now brave enough to tell YouGov, we think that Islam is incompatible with being British.
Is that so?
Yes.
Hello and welcome back to Deprogrammed. This is the New Culture Forum show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. My name is Harrison Pitt. I'm a fellow at the New Culture Forum, and I'm joined today, as ever, by my trusty co-host, Connor Tomlinson, who is one of the leading contributors at Courage Media and the host of Tomlinson Talks on YouTube, and our special guest this week, Laurie Wastell, who is the associate editor of the Daily Sceptic and the host of the Sceptic podcast and a friend of the New Culture Forum. Laurie, welcome. Connor, welcome.
Good to be here.
So gentleman pressure clearly works. Reform UK have proposed a very welcome, in my view, and we can get to why in due course, set of changes to Britain's legal immigration system, primarily centred on a category known as indefinite leave to remain, ILR. For people who don't know, I'll just explain in advance. This is a sort of intermediary status, complete with all sorts of costly perks, costly to the taxpayer, that is, to do with welfare and healthcare, that is enjoyed by immigrants after 5 years of being here, and effectively puts them on a conveyor belt to citizenship at the end of the road. And Reform have made a pretty startling announcement about this. Connor, what have Reform pledged, and do you welcome it?
Yeah, this is total Bidwell victory. Basically, Reform have said not only are they going to scrap ILR going forward, which is far harsher than Kemi Badenoch's half measure of. So Sam Bidwell said you should extend it to 10 years and limit it to certain countries. She said we're not going to do any country limits. We're going to reduce it to 5 years and say that only criminals don't get ILR. Reform have come out and just straight up said we're going to reverse the Boriswave. We're going to send all the people retroactively here that should never have been given ILR because they were never invited in the first place home, and nobody's going to get ILR going forward except for very specific limited circumstances for work visas, and even those work visas will only be given out if you demonstrate a near native level of English competency. We're going to be much more scrupulous about what qualifications we admit. So we're not going to say that, the qualifications from an Indian university is the exact same as an American university, for example. And they're going to be much more selective about who they let in and in what quantities. And if you combine this with the encouraging trend that Zia Yusuf has said before, that they're no longer net zero, they're now net negative migration. That's their legal immigration policy, that they are committed to mass deportations after, yes, being dragged kicking and screaming for a year by the likes of me, you and Steve Edgington. They are coming around to the positions of what was formerly derided as the online right. And this derision was perhaps expedient electoral strategy where they thought they had to appeal to the centre, the moderates, but that has been completely thrown by the wayside now because they're just using the phrase Boriswave, which was invented. Some attribute it to Courtney Druckper, some to Max Tempers. I know both of them say it was another Anon account that they then used to popularise the term, but it is purely an invention of Anons on X, and it is now a flagship policy, a vote-winning policy for the party that is topping the polls right now. And so this vindicates the fact that MAGA have a phrase, right, among the base: trust the plan, but always chimp. And the idea is that you put your faith in Trump to do the right thing eventually, because he is the God Emperor, or he's been given the mandate of heaven to rule. But anytime you see someone around Trump stray from what the base wants, you can trust that Trump is checking his own Twitter, his own base, and so you chimp out, you throw a fit online to give direct feedback to the king, and then the king holds court and addresses the concern of his base. And it shows that trust the plan, Reform are definitely going to win, but always chimp, as we have been doing, saying we're worried about you tracking to the left and not listening to your own base and not being strong enough on migration. Turns out it works. Keep up the chimping.
You've written a very good piece for the Telegraph, Laurie, about where this leaves Keir Starmer, namely between a rock and a hard place, because he's bound by his own pledge to try and reverse the Boriswave. Indeed, this is now mainstream discourse, but he's also held hostage to his own pretty psychotic backbenchers who view even attempting to do such a thing as a sort of fascist maneuver. Do you want to develop that point for us? This leaves Starmer in serious trouble, isn't it?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think let's just go back a little bit. So the Conservatives' policy, part of this whole process of the idea of tackling ILR being mainstreamed began actually with Kemi Badenoch. She's not going to get any credit for it at all, but it did become Conservative Party policy in about March. I think it was actually to raise the ILR threshold from 5 years to 10 years and to make that retroactive. So it would have applied to the Boriswave. Now, only a few months after that, it was Starmer's infamous Island of Strangers speech. And as part of that, there was those efforts against ILR, which were pretty similar to the Conservatives, that 5 years to 10 years and some other conditions as well. Even at the time, they did have to be pushed a little bit to confirm that this would apply retroactively, which is the key thing for it to apply to the Boriswave. But currently, that is Home Office policy. It's interesting. It's very much a sign of the times that this was brought in under Yvette Cooper, who infamously had a refugees welcome sign she held up, while in opposition. But nevertheless, that's supposedly currently government policy. And I checked this week with the Home Office. Is that still going to be going ahead? And so they have, for instance, pledged a consultation on it. Now, it's 4 months after that was first mooted. That still hasn't happened. So I think gives you an idea of how wary they are to go forward with it. But certainly that's the idea. And the Home Office indeed gave me a relatively robust statement there saying basically that they are aware that, the influx and the lack of fiscal contribution they're likely to make is a big problem, and they are going to get to grips with it, supposedly. But that said, the consultation's still in the distance. But of course, the issue here is that while we can note some of the reactions that Labour have had to reforms policy this week, which I think is very interesting, because there's almost two levels of it, two tiers, if you like. But in the leadership, there hasn't been much ability to criticise the actual principle of the policy, which has been very notable. So the most senior person to criticise it was Rachel Reeves.
Sorry, Laurie, the principle of what policy? Of ILR as currently constituted? A reforms policy.
A reforms policy, yes.
Right, sorry.
So they didn't come out and say it's unconscionable for you to go after ILR.
Sure.
What they'd said was, you haven't quite got the figures right, and it's a sort of slapdash policy. And that already, I think, is something very much to note, that's very much arguing on the restrictionists' terms, which is a good thing. But that was for the Labour Party press office. That was for Rachel Reeves. But of course, in the wider party, we know that the backbenchers, the base, feel very strongly that any kind of immigration restrictionism is, as you said, equivalent to Nazi, it is racism, it is whatever else. They feel very strongly about it. And so they began kicking off this week. So you had Sadiq Khan saying that the very idea of it is unacceptable. You had various others calling it racist, etc. And to sort of flesh this out just a little bit more, even with the government's own proposals, there has been a petition on them that's come out and that's been debated just a couple of weeks ago. And you had various Labour MPs come in there and say how absolutely immoral it was on principle, how indeed, far from restricting ILR, they should be opening up new routes in order to take the fight to the right and things like this. And so what that means is that when Labour finally get round to this consultation, which they supposedly are doing soon, all of these Labour MPs are going to start kicking off about it majorly. That's the headache he has. And just to finish, I suppose there's two other points that really hit that home. Number one, they have already had this successful rebellion over welfare.
Yeah.
And that was when Starmer had more authority than he does now. Certainly, I mean, that itself took much of his authority away in many ways. But in particular, there's also the question of Morgan McSweeney, the right-leaning advisor to Starmer. And so the left of the party, perhaps they're rallying around Andy Burnham, in particular, the mayor of Manchester, or Greater Manchester, but they're looking much more mutinous, and Starmer's authority is very much shot. So it's going to be extremely difficult for them to get this policy over the line. In any case, they never really were very minded to do it.
Yes.
And so that's the difficulty. And they basically need to have pressure applied to them constantly to hopefully get them to do this.
It should be specified here, of course, that by right-leaning on, when you describe someone like Morgan McSweeney as right-leaning, you just mean sort of more pragmatically.
Not an analyst.
Yes.
Yeah, about the state of the country. And indeed, Andy Burnham would probably fall under that description as well.
We might say right posturing.
Yeah, posturing, and just understanding that, like as in the case of welfare, they were only going to make a fraction of fractions, but the cuts were going to be absolutely tiny. And given that so many on the Labour backbenches lack any kind of pragmatic dimension to them whatsoever, they are just heavily ideologized. That was intolerable to them, and so this will be, given that cultural matters are far more important to modern left liberals than fiscal nuts and bolts matters. Presumably they'll be even more mutinous over this, because it would involve reversing a mass immigration experiment on which they are fully on board. You want to say something?
Yeah, because I just wanted to add the proof that pragmatism, the currents of pragmatism flowing rightward, is that Ed Davey, demented though he is, at the Liberal Democrats conference a couple of days ago, said that personal independence payments need to be reformed because there is a vast amount of abuse and waste.
This is welfare stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realise he followed Max Temper's on X. So even when the Liberal Democrats are using Max Temper's talking points, I read
a wonderful piece in the Pimlico Journal the other day, and on about the Motability scheme. So,
and of course, Ed Davey, he's also going after music out loud on trains.
Yeah, how very racist of him.
Yeah, call it with the racist remarks.
Yeah, quite. Quick thing, by the way, because you mentioned that Rachel Reeves has been attacking the policy on logistical grounds. This is also something that Wes Streeting has been trying to post on X in the last 24 hours, and that Ian Dale, again, right posturing, but agrees with the Green Party on practically every policy, went after David Bull on LBC today. What was the technical disagreement they had? Because I know Carl Williams put out the figures that they then used, and they're saying those figures have been refuted. Do you mind clearing that up?
Well,
also explain
who
Carl Williams is.
Absolutely. So Carl Williams is, he works on immigration at the Centre for Policy Studies, very, very good researcher. So obviously there's been a lot of attention on the fiscal impact of the Boriswave, and based on the OBR's figures from, I think it was last autumn, of how many people had arrived in the past 5 years and what they were likely to be, whether they're likely to be working, and their fiscal contribution, the CPS came up with a figure based on the fiscal contributions and the numbers arriving, which was a very, very conservative estimate of only 800,000. And that got the figure of approximately 234 billion in lifetime costs in welfare and other transfer payments to these people.
The OBR had said it was about 60% of the people arriving on skilled worker visas were earning less than half the median wage. And that meant that all of the other visas as well, dependents, refugee, family reunification, were also not net taxpayer contributors. So that meant 95% conservative estimate of the Boriswave are not paying taxes across their lifetime. And this led up to a bill of £465,000 per person by the age of life expectancy, 81. So then he fed that into the system and came out with that 230.
Pretty much, yes. And so, it was actually a conservative estimate both on the numbers arriving and on the tax contribution, because it could indeed be worse. And so, the OBR being the OBR have actually retracted some of those figures, and the CPS have said, okay, well, we need to wait for those figures now. And that's all it is. But the thing is, probably the OBR, we know that they tend to underestimate the numbers coming in and the fiscal, and to, I guess, overestimate the fiscal contribution. And so actually that figure is likely to be much, much worse, not better. And so you have various Labour MPs attacking Nigel Farage, saying, the figures are wrong. Actually, the figures are even more dire.
And people are interested. We should say, I believe this is the September 2024 fiscal risks and sustainability report put out by the OBR, which you can read online.
So the OBR's migration projections the last few years have been wrong by a factor of 2 to 3. So they may have misallocated the number of people, as you said. And then also, when they ran this model of your average working migrant, they only calculated it if they are arriving and working from age 25. So this is not accounting for the children that have arrived via family reunification or illegal migration, if there are any of those, because you get 40-year-old men claiming to be infants, and we don't check the dental records. And then, of course, as we've seen from studies from Denmark and the Netherlands, the children of immigrants from the Middle East, North and Sub-Saharan Africa, Pakistan, Turkey, etc., largely from India now as well, from Neil O'Brien's research, they are, on average, never net taxpayers across their entire lifespan. So the children are going to be even more expensive because they've got education, NHS, dental care, etc. And that's not even factored into the CPS numbers. So we, even before the OBR retracted it, we knew that it was a very conservative estimate that didn't account for the amount of money that is spent on immigrant children as well.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
So another thing that I think is really important, obviously, is very important to get into the nuts and bolts of all this. But aren't you also encouraged, gentlemen, about how the reform is now using the term Boriswave, and not just because it is a reflective of and a testament to the influence of the so-called very online right and all the rest of it, although that is worth celebrating in and of itself, clearly, but because there have been. It's never been quite clear what the relationship is behind the scenes between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. I know quite a few people internally in Reform who have said
Boris
Johnson's guts, and have said that despite sort of private criticisms they have of the leadership of Reform and the way in which certain mistakes and certain missteps and all the rest of it, the one thing that would really be a red line for them would be were they to invite Boris into the midst. The problem has been, up until now, is a lot of people in the country, God bless them, are still not fully aware of what a demographic vandal Boris Johnson was. And as such, there are some polls that suggest, particularly with Conservative voters, that they view a sort of Nigel Boris ticket as just complete gold dust and well worth pushing for. Now that Reform are explicitly using the term Boriswave, this is impossible, isn't it?
And it was in the Mail, where he is a columnist, which is quite a funny one.
So this is big. This is symbolically huge.
Yes, I think so. I mean, there has been sometimes a tendency in Reform to be, I think, a bit petty about some members of the Conservative Party who are a bit more sound. But on Boris Johnson, I'm absolutely with them. I think we really got an indication of this at this recent leaked meeting during the Trump visit. With various Conservative MPs and some Reform ones too were having a dinner with State Department types, including Boris Johnson. And basically the discussion turned to immigration, and as it would want to. And one of the junior ministers there, former junior ministers, Tory minister, I forget his name now, but basically made a boilerplate statement about reducing immigration. It
was Mark Harper.
Right, there you go. And Boris Johnson weighed in and made quite a fool of himself by saying how actually, foreigners make a wonderful contribution.
Why would any immigrants for everything?
And Reform, you can't believe they're doing that. And so it really does show that the leopard does not change his spots. This wasn't just some kind of, he was listening to Carrie and didn't notice. He's actually rowing in behind his own disastrous legacy.
One of the compounding factors for that dinner as well, because I spoke to a couple of people who were there, was that they stuck Boris on the same table as Sajid Javid and Mark Harper. And so that inflamed tensions ahead of the immigration discussion because, of course, Mark and Sajid were both responsible for Boris's final ousting. Because it was Sajid's resignation, and then Harper, along with Steve Baker, were circulating the letter to get the MPs to sign on to say, you've gone too far with Partygate. So it was actually his nemesis winding him up, trying to distance themselves from Boris's utterly awful legacy, and then like Sideshow Bobby just went around the circle, just stepping on every rake possible in front of everyone. But that's also useful because he did it in front of the delegation that the State Department were there. The State Department are already very suspicious of any softening on immigration stances in the UK, let's put it that way, because of the Trump administration. And this was meant to be a dinner that's basically, yet again, buttering up the State Department to foster normalised relationships.
You think
with
they'd be able
Farage.
to play nice, right? But yes, certainly not. Well, yes, it's very telling, I think, and yeah.
Well, no, the logistics as well. I think people should know too that in the vast majority of cases, this would not involve, like nighttime raids and all the rest of it. We're talking here about the expiry of visas that are legal and their proper expiry. So that your visa doesn't just go from being a legal visa. I think this is the major virtue of the policy, is that it basically cuts off at the root in law the presupposition that we've been operating on for a while now, that built into any kind of legal visa here, whether it's a spousal visa. Well, spousal visas actually make more sense, but if it's a work visa, if it's a student visa, often even tourist visas, built into the assumption up until now has been the assumption that, well, once you're here for 5 years, well, you go on a conveyor belt to citizenship, and residency, in other words, amounts to citizenship in the long run, and that's just being cut off at the root, and that's a very, very important thing to do. We're talking about here that if people go to Hungary or to the United States and they have a sort of 90-day visa, you're not allowed to overstay that. So that's what this basically involves. It wouldn't actually be that dramatic and theatrical.
It's also
the process of getting rid of them.
It's also important that Boris, even though he continues to defend it, as does Priti Patel, he didn't know that ILR existed when he removed the visa reunion caps.
Really?
Yeah. So I asked close source.
How do we know that? I was sourcing.
Yeah. Who is, let's say, familiar with his thinking at the time. And he did not know ILR existed, so he did not know this would be the unintended consequence. And then instead of going, yeah, my bad, I was given bad advice, and shirking blame onto the Migration Advisory Committee, which he can't, because in 2018 they said this would be a terrible idea, and they're pro-migration anyway, so he ignored the guidance. Rather than shirking blame onto Priti Patel, who clearly just wanted to import her co-ethnics, he's been dumb enough to just double down on it and say, this was absolutely excellent, I'm literally Churchill for involving us in Ukraine, why don't you elect me again? And so that the positive thing about this, to come back to your original question, is that Reform has been packing its party out with Tory defectors and turning themselves into a refugee camp. So it's taken in Nadine Dorries, it's taken in Jake Berry, and Jacob Rees-Mogg is trying to be a public power broker for a Tory Reform pact, because he's a party man to the core, but being frank, he wants his old seat back because it's an easy job. They are all trying to feather the nest for a Boris comeback. They've been open about it. This kicks the nest out of the tree, especially since Goodwin and to his credit, Yusuf have been public saying, Boris Johnson is a traitor, I'd rather see him in the Tower of London than ever join my party.
That's right.
And this cements it.
What about the reaction then? So we've already mentioned Khan. You've also got these sort of pearl clutchers who pose as being more centre-right or centre-left, as the case may be. Andrew Marr was pearl clutching on LBC.
That was beautiful.
Ian Dale was pearl clutching on LBC. These are people who are just completely out of touch with the state of public opinion in this country, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think what's very telling and a very good sign in this debate is that you now have the sort of confused mixing of two different arguments. So, of course, these types of people have had to believe for a very long time that it's a wonderful economic benefit, all of these low-skilled migrants, which obviously it isn't. And that argument has collapsed to such an extent that they might make it at times, and then maybe they make it about social care or something, like a sort of small carve-out from it.
Sure.
But then there's that flipping to, and this is certainly what Labour are doing, but also what some of the more sentimentalist types on the right are doing, to saying, oh, well, actually set the economic argument aside, it's basically just mean to do this.
Yeah, right.
If I may just say one thing very quickly, they also do that. They also are schizophrenic on even the economic point before they get to the kind of moralizing zeal, because they say on the one hand that these people benefit our economy, and yet when you say that we are going, and then if people like us come along and say, well, if they're supporting us, if they're not supporting themselves, they can hardly be supporting us. So why do they need all of these perks that they enjoy under ILR? They say that it's mean to take them away. So which is it?
Quite.
Which is it?
Yes. Well, exactly. It's sort of a very neat policy. If you are saying that, they're not costing us anything, then if we're taking away perks, then
They can have an objection.
Yeah, why does GDP rocket fuel need all this social housing? Oh, they're not claiming it? Well, then you've got no problem with us not letting them have it in the first place.
And so I think it's very important that moves you then on to this more political, more moral question of whether people think that we want to be, I think as Boris Johnson put it, the food bank of Boris Johnson, not Nigel Farage put it this week, rather, the food bank of the world.
Right.
And that is actually the ground on which Reform are very well placed to win. That's why they're riding high in the polls, and that's really the argument that the political class is afraid of, and that people are, in the public, increasingly not accepting.
The affirmative case is literally just, at this point, your country should be a weird foreign welfare battery farm, and you get absolutely no say because every time we've consulted you, you've said no thanks and we've delivered it anyway, and you're a racist if you complain. Like, the economic argument is gone, the cultural argument is certainly gone with the hideous aesthetics of the UK. Yet again, a phrase coined by a wonderful Anon, Kamidruppa. And so, as this enters the lexicon, as people have a negative personal experience of immigration on a daily basis, even if it's something as banal as things being played aloud on a train and not being able to find a seat, as the numbers keep rolling in, and actually even when they get rescinded, they'll come out even worse and vindicating the case, the moral argument is undeniable. And so our enemies do retreat to arguing on our terms. And so they lose the argument because they're arguing the conditions of our surrender. But we're in no mood to surrender. We're pressing the advantage now. They're going home.
Yeah, but worth adding that we've actually had a precursor to this debate all summer on the illegal migration issue. And that one is more straightforwardly a moral issue in a way where you have to just say, no, we don't accept hundreds of thousands of refugees just because you say it's the right thing to do.
Not just refugees, fake refugees who are foreign rapists.
Well, whatever. But even if there is a sort of moral dividing line, and you basically have to have the spine to say, no, we don't want them here. That's enough.
Yes.
And in some ways, that's stealing the political, those on the right who are making these arguments, and the public more widely, for these kinds of discussions, which have been quite taboo, to essentially say, well, the asylum system is wrong in and of itself, and therefore we don't want it. But if you can make that argument for illegal migration, and then the left are making that argument for legal migration, then you can say, well, it doesn't apply there either.
Exactly. There are two major virtues, in my view, to this announcement, one of which I've already named. That is to say that it establishes the principle that residency and visas, residency and citizenship are not sort of built-in entitlements that you acquire later down the line of coming here for whatever purpose. So that's the first major virtue, and that's really, really good, because that has just been taken for granted by our political elite for a good many decades now. And then the second major virtue that the policy has, in my view, is that it takes and you've sort of been implying this already, it takes the fights to our opponents. You mentioned Sadiq Khan earlier. He did say something along the lines of, it's unacceptable to deport people living here, working and living here legally, is what Sadiq Khan said. And of course, you and I don't agree with that. I don't think you do either, Laurie. But I think that's interesting in a way, because when you take the fight, I was speaking to a head teacher once, and they said to me, the reason why we drive standards across the board in our school, and among things that might seem trivial, like dresses or how high your socks can be, is because if that's where the kind of argy-bargy with the students is, then you're not going to have any students whacking teachers over the head with chairs.
It's broken windows policing policy.
Yeah, exactly. If you sort of establish the simple bits really early on, you don't need to get to like once you're arguing with a student over whether they're allowed to whack teachers with a baseball bat, this is a waste of time. Now, by analogy, here,
if you stop littering, you don't need Singapore.
Yeah, exactly. But in this case, on the immigration issue, because you're right, the broken windows principle is exactly the same. If Sadiq Khan is saying it's unacceptable to deport people living here legally, if I pressed him on this, he probably would climb down. But he's basically implying that it is acceptable to deport people who are here illegally. And so you're already seeing the left arguing on terms in which they feel very, very awkward. And this is a trick that the right has missed in our country for so long. They've been constantly genuflecting to the left's moral standards, the left's moral language, the left's moral presuppositions, certain sacred categories, even trying sometimes to argue against the left on their own terms. You guys are the real racists because you're patronizing to black people, all this sort of crap, which only reinforces all of the standards that the left are very keen to entrench in our society. And I don't know whether Reform know that they're doing this, but by pressing on this, they are. And Sadiq Khan actually, there are some implicit concessions in what Sadiq Khan says, even in his condemnation of the announcement.
The other implicit concession is, what would be wrong with living in Pakistan, Sadiq?
Oh, God. Yeah. It's true.
But I think on that, I mean, it's very clear that the intellectual and political energy is on the right. And one of the ways we see this is actually, strangely enough, on the pages of things like the New Statesman, which basically are publishing most of the time just these laments for the fact that the right is rising. There was a front cover recently which was titled "The Age of Deportation." Yeah. And there are no new arguments in here. There's not even really as much of a rallying cry, other than just sort of saying, oh, well, it was nice while my dream of this lasted.
The best one was the Chinese guy who usually writes about sports in The Guardian. His name's slipped my mind at the moment. Something Chu, I think. He wrote... no, that's genuinely, that's it.
No, it's just funny.
Being disparaging.
It's just objectively funny.
He wrote a piece saying, what's next? Remigration? And then just started listing out what people hauled out of their families in the dead of night. So maybe they're marketed it as a permanent holiday back to a wonderful place. Maybe you give them extra leg room. This is unthinkable. And I'm just thinking... okay, you can only dream so much. Like they're doing our sort of fantasizing for us, and it's and you're right in that hilarious sort of cartoon that accompanied the New Statesman headline. I almost want to print it out and like frame it in my toilet. Right. It's just hilarious.
Yes, and so I mean, so Conor, we both wrote about the Now in England conference as well, and our pieces, generated a lot of debate. I think it's fair to say.
And quite literally, it's generated debate that's coming out on the Spectator at the end of the week with Mr. Gove.
And I think that was another one. They're very much laying the grounds for these debates, these policies this autumn. But equally, there was a New Statesman piece on that, which was basically just sort of sniping. And I vaguely know the gentleman that wrote it, but it's sort of, well, what else do you have to say here other than, it's sort of these vague asides about maybe that something that one of the people from the audience said was racist. That's all they can really do.
That's all they've done. I think I might have read that piece. Someone sent it to me because I was mentioned in it, and I think Stephen was too. Maybe you were. I got down to it before when the paywall kicked in, so I only saw me being mentioned earlier. Is it called like the new racism of the British right or something?
No, it was focused on Thomas Skinner, but
oh right, maybe
it was a write-up of Now and Again.
Yeah, but you're right though, Laurie. Like rather than getting my own little thing in there, like just to establish the general point, all they really have is a sort of Mean Girls invective. And a sort of weaponization of social taboos.
It's really quite impotent.
Well, it's very impotent. It's very, very feminine. And the weaponization of social taboos that long ago lost any legitimacy and may have had a sort of ersatz legitimacy when we still seemed to live in sort of Hugh Grant, Bridget Jones Britain, which in so many ways is actually quite implicitly secure and conservative demographically, like look at Notting Hill, that sort of the film, all that sort of thing. But when the decline is palpable and the third worldification of Britain is just unavoidable, all of a sudden it does become clearer to people, even people who are not as up to scratch on all the arcana as we are, the immigration demographic related arcana, just to say, oh right, so I have a choice between saving my country and being called racist and not saving my country and being called racist. Well, I may as well save the country. I think that the decision is becoming more and more apparent to people. So these sort of, as I say, the weaponization of these social taboos, you're a racist, you're a fascist, you're far right, which doesn't really have an effect on people anymore. And that is to be celebrated, and Reformer, catching up. And they deserve credit when they go right. Where should we press next, gentlemen?
Islam.
How?
Well, it needs to be confronted that not all immigrants are equal, and that if you input a particular culture into a country, you don't get the same country at the end of it, even if you try and run a mass demographic experiment coupled with sufficient integration strategies or British values. And this is an important thing because one of Farage's statements that he needs to be held to task on was in his interview with Winston Marshall last year, where he said, if we alienate the whole of Islam, we will lose. Yet again, just like with mass deportations polling that said the overwhelming majority of Reform's voters want mass deportations, 53% of the British public are now brave enough to tell YouGov, we think that Islam is incompatible with being British.
Is that so?
Yes. That was a couple of weeks ago.
Didn't see that.
So I would be fascinated to see the breakdown, because it was reported in the Telegraph, the breakdown specifically by party. Because I guarantee by party it is overwhelmingly, we do not like Islam. And so this does create a bit of a problem for Reform when they have promoted Layla to be potentially the London mayoral candidate, and Zia, who has said he's a practicing Muslim but has not in his interviews been quite so clear about what his denomination is or his commitment to his faith. It could be possible that, he would face personal stigma from saying, well, I'm not really that devout from his own community and family. That's up for him to talk about. Because recently he's been very sound on policy despite problems with Rupert Lowe in the past, which we all think are repugnant. However, that is going to be a stone in their shoe if they don't address that. And I think what we're going to start seeing is the Tory party addressing that to try and flank to the right, especially when Jemrick takes over, because they've already tabled the cousin marriage bill. Jemrick is tweeting about terrorists that are let off by the judiciary every other day. They're going to confront this issue and they're going to try and flank to Reform's right. And so Reform are probably going to have to work out what they need to say on this particular topic.
What do you think, Laurie?
I agree. I would only qualify it in a slight way that the sort of upstream of that, you might say, is just generally being very, very open about being able to evaluate the outcomes of different migrant groups and say which ones are contributing and which ones aren't. And then in some ways, as we were discussing before with ILR, are you contributing? Are you not? And that's actually a very neutral and almost fair seeming standard, as long as you have the standards quite high. And therefore it can, to some extent, take the heat out of these questions where you do not necessarily want to, or it depends where, but at times you want to have some political cover for doing something that you might know will have a certain, let's say, demographic effect, but you might not want to sort of lead in those terms.
That's absolutely right. I completely agree with you. Politically, we're talking here, we're talking stuff like, we're going to set cap at this level because we've done crunch the numbers, and we realize that in the event of doing so, we will get more immigration from very culturally proximate countries in Western Europe, North America, and Australasia, and far less in third world backwaters like Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and I don't know, the Congo, or whatever. Well, that's in Africa. I was looking for the perfect three.
Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea. I couldn't think of another. But that's the sort of thing you're looking at. You don't actually have to lead on that point, which can still be contentious to some people.
I do think that point is going to be forced, though.
It is going to be.
Because there's something about social media and the existence of the camera phone that just abolishes any pretenses that the blank slate is real. And so I think we're going to end up getting drilled down to a kind of conversation about, compatible nations and incompatible nations.
I think you're right about that, Connor, but I think you're talking about the transitional stages. Before we get
I don't disagree. I just think the conversation is going to outpace that sort of neutral policy.
What do you think?
Well, I sort of both could be true, I think, but there's a I don't know if you had Guy Dampier on this show, but
we never had Guy.
Very good piece
never asked him, but
in the Telegraph earlier this year that I interviewed him about, but which is that it was actually Kevin Bannock had done it in her slightly sort of scatterbrained, but nevertheless important comments on the Miri Puris being like a peasant culture.
Oh, yeah.
But the point was there, she was actually saying, well, there's one particular culture that is worse than others, and we don't want them here, essentially. And that this was a particular taboo that had been broken, and that one has to therefore push on that. Of course, going back to the OBR not being very upfront about various things, one of the things that they have failed to do for a long time, and also other statistical bodies, no doubt, is to break down these figures by in this very granular way, which will, as I said before, you could use that in an almost totally colorblind way and say, oh well, if you're not above this, then sorry, and that is sort of a more almost technocratic way of doing it, which might be helpful.
Another point I would like to make, you mentioned Layla Cunningham and Zia Youssef, and I don't want to be gratuitously rude to either of these people. I've actually exchanged messages with Layla Cunningham before. I've been in the same room as Youssef and never actually spoken to her. She seems really, really sweet, actually, like a really good person. But they both have a habit of falling into a way of speaking about religion that is very, very shallow and 90s coded. And I would say this to them in person. You watch it from now on, viewers should watch it as well. They always say, they kind of lean into kind of American pluralist.
My faith is very impulse to me.
No, I don't mean that. They lean into a pluralist American ethos about what religion is. They say things like this: we don't care what your skin color is. We don't care. And then they say, we don't care which God you pray to, which is a very reductionist way of looking at religion, as if it's just a matter of like whether you like vanilla ice cream or strawberry ice cream. We're talking about people's comprehensive metaphysical, cosmological, and moral understanding of the world. This isn't something that can be reduced to matters of personal taste, and yet they frame it like that. That is again, when you're going through a transitional period in your country's history of being having a sort of soft Christian consensus to being secular, and then whatever comes next, it's understandable, but that you can have that understanding about religion, that sort of pluralist understanding. Oh, well, it's just a matter of personal taste. We don't want to be too invasive. We don't want to be too intrusive. But in parts of the world where they still have what people would call, strong gods, they believe in family, they believe in religion, they believe in all these things. Like, these are really, really significant consequential motivators. It cannot just be reduced to which God you happen to pray to, and I think that's going to become more and more untenable over the years.
It's not just a costume, I think.
Exactly.
And well, I mean, to get a bit historical here, I've been hearing a lot recently about the founding of England and Alfred in particular, and one of the basically tools of social engineering, if you like, that he used to win over the Danes after he defeated them in 878, in Edington in the West Country, so he forcibly, or maybe not even forcibly, anyway, he converted Guthrum, the Danish king, to Christianity, and hitherto they were completely unable to have any treaties with the Danes because they just kept breaking them because they weren't swearing on the same gods, and they just sort of didn't see it as important. But anyway, there's a lot one could go into here, but basically you have converting them to Christianity, but you have these Christian principles being very well baked into the common law as well. and he's using in these proclamations, he's talking about everyone as the Angles who are all under God,
Yes.
all together, essentially. And that this is sort of very much forgotten now, unfortunately, but this Saxon legacy of our constitution, but also this Christian legacy of our legal system, that is very much there. And one way we know that that's there, and that would have been obvious to even our recent ancestors, is that who are the statues outside the royal courts of justice? Well, the top one is Jesus. Next to him is Alfred, who was basing his own legal codes on the Bible, basically.
The life of Moses and
Moses in
He translated the Bible into
Indeed,
Albanian.
yes, and other things as well. And he was a great patron of literature. Then it's Solomon, and then on the back of it is the back of the building is Moses.
Yeah.
And so this is very well baked in there, and it's, I think, all too easily forgotten,
Yes.
that legacy.
Notably, what Alfred didn't say to the Danish king is, "Don't worry about it as long as you're a nice fella," which is basically our position on religion today.
We've got more in common.
You've got more in common than that which divides us.
If I may, one final remark.
Yes.
The problem with that perspective is, especially in a resurgence of Christian feeling, particularly among our age demographic and our audience, and especially on the right, which Reform are speaking to, you're going to sit yourself in a position where one or the other constituency are waiting for the rug pull.
Yeah.
Whether it's the moderate Muslims that you think you have won over because you have put Layla and Zia forward, who have been not so specific about which particular denomination they belong to, despite professing their devoutedness. They feel as if this can bring in Muslim voters, as Farage said in his interview, or the patriotic British majority who are sceptical of Islam because infinite number of terror attacks, plus the Gen Z voters who are more secure in their identity as Englishmen and are more interested in Christianity. So they're wondering, are your candidates authentically Muslim, or is it just an electoral strategy? And so one constituency or the other is waiting to be betrayed.
Yeah.
You don't want to set yourself up in that position. Clarify it now.
All to play for. Well, this has been very enlightening as expected, gentlemen. Laurie, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Connor, thank you as ever for being along for the ride. And thank you for watching too. Make sure to like, subscribe. Do leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.